The tap was barely anything. One claw, one polite little tink against my chest plate, the kind of touch you use to check if a wall is solid. Threll did not mean anything cruel by it. That is the part I kept thinking about later. She was not trying to start a fight. She was only being proud, the way her whole species tended to be proud, tapping the primitive human armor for the cameras before the readiness test the compact had planned to make us look small. My armor did not agree that it was nothing. It burst apart like a mirror thrown against stone, and for one full second, nobody on that ship knew what had just happened. Let me start from the beginning, because a lot led up to that moment. I had been placed on the Varith Accord, the coalition ship that found Earth 6 months earlier. When they found us, the compact did not celebrate. They studied us the way you might study a strange animal that wandered into your yard, with curiosity, but also with doubt. 11 species made up their alliance, and every one of them had technology far older than ours. They had ships that folded space. They had cities built from living metal. They had weapons that could open a hole in a moon. Next to all that, humanity looked like children playing with sticks. I was junior staff on the ship. I carried messages. I poured water at meetings. I translated small talk between officials who did not fully trust each other yet. Nobody expected me to matter. I certainly did not expect to matter. I was the quiet human in the corner of the room, taking notes, saying little, hoping not to embarrass anyone. Then Ambassador Vesic changed everything. Vesic was tall, more than 4 meters, with skin that shimmered faintly under the ship's lights. He wore ceremonial robes that seemed heavier than any human could carry, yet he moved through them without effort. He spoke slowly, choosing each word like a blade, and every sentence he gave us felt like a small test. One afternoon, in the middle of trade discussions, he stopped everything and made a new demand. He wanted a combat readiness demonstration. He wanted to see human defense technology tested, live, in front of representatives from every member species of the compact. He said it politely, the way someone might ask for a cup of tea, but everyone in the room understood the real meaning behind the words. He wanted proof that we were as weak as he believed. Our senior diplomats did not like the idea. They worried it would go wrong. They worried our equipment, judged next to alien technology, would look like a toy breaking apart in a strong wind. Some of them wanted to refuse the test outright, but refusing would have looked like fear, and fear was the one thing we could not afford to show. I volunteered before I had time to think it through completely. Part of it was pride. Part of it was trust. I had worn standard Terran Defense Corps armor during training exercises back home, more times than I could count, and I knew what it could do. It was not flashy. It did not glow or hum with strange energy. It looked almost plain compared to compact designs, but it had one purpose, and it did that purpose extremely well. It kept the person inside alive, no matter what. The technicians from the compact prepared the test weapon themselves. I watched them calibrate it, watched the small smiles they exchanged while they worked, as if they already knew how the test would end. They set the output low, not out of kindness, but because they expected our equipment to fail even at a gentle level. They wanted footage of us flinching, not footage of an accident. Good theater, in other words, built entirely on the assumption that we had nothing worth testing. I stood inside the metal test rig they built for the demonstration, feeling small under the bright lights and the many eyes watching from the observation deck. My armor felt heavier than usual, or maybe that was just nerves. Around me stood engineers from 6 different worlds, checking dials, adjusting readings, speaking quietly to each other in languages I only partly understood. That is when Threll walked over. She was Vesic's attaché, sharp-featured, quick-moving, the kind of person who seemed to correct everyone's grammar even in languages that were not her own. She looked me over slowly, the way someone studies an old machine they expect to break down soon. Then she reached out one clawed hand and tapped my chest plate, just once. She said afterward that she only wanted to check if it felt solid, the same way you might knock on a door to see if anyone answers. My armor had been active the entire walk to the test rig. It listens constantly for contact, for pressure, for any sign of danger. It cannot tell the difference between a curious tap from a diplomat and the first strike of a real attack. All it knows is this: something touched me, and energy was present, so it must respond. So it did exactly what it was built to do. The plate did not simply crack. It came apart entirely, bursting outward in a perfect ring of fragments, every seam releasing at once, as small internal dampeners absorbed the shock and turned it into light and sound instead of force. Threll stumbled backward, caught completely off guard. The cameras, which were supposed to record our failure, instead captured something nobody in that room expected. 40 kilograms of advanced armor exploding a few centimeters from a human chest, and that same human standing afterward, completely unharmed, chest bare under the bright lights. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Vesek's mouth opened and closed without any sound coming out. Threll sat on the floor, staring up at me like I had somehow grown a second head in front of her. "Your armor is broken," she finally said, her voice sharp with disbelief. "No," I answered, still catching my breath. "It worked exactly the way it should." I tried to explain as clearly and calmly as I could, because I could see, from their faces, that this idea was completely new to them. Every armor system I had ever heard the Compact describe was built around one goal: never break. Layers stacked on layers, systems designed to resist damage no matter what. To them, an object that broke apart on purpose sounded like nothing more than poor design. Ours works differently. Ours makes a trade. When the danger coming toward a person is greater than what a body alone can survive, the armor destroys itself instead, on purpose, taking that danger and turning it into noise, heat, and scattered pieces rather than letting it reach the person underneath. It is not a flaw that it falls apart. It is the entire idea behind it. We build tools that are willing to be destroyed, so that the person wearing them does not have to be. Vesek recovered his composure faster than I expected. "An accident," he said firmly, straightening his robes. "It proves nothing at all. The formal test will continue as planned." They did not give me time to replace the broken chest plate. According to protocol, the same operator had to complete the full sequence, and there was no spare armor on the ship built for a human frame. What I had left was a smaller emergency plate, barely larger than a dinner tray, magnetically clipped over my chest exactly where the test weapon was aimed to fire. I heard someone from our side of the room start to object, their voice rising with worry. I told them it would be fine. I was not entirely sure that was true, but there was no turning back at that point, not with every camera and every important guest watching. The test weapon fired. I wish I could describe the half-second before impact as something dramatic, some slow and clear moment of understanding. But honestly, it was mostly noise and bright light, and my own heartbeat pounding loud in my ears. The small plate did exactly what its larger version had done only minutes earlier. It came apart in a burst of fragments, dampeners working at full strength, turning the incoming force into a wall of light and sound instead of letting it pass through. When the light faded and the smoke cleared, I was still standing. My skin felt warm at the edges, my ears rang loudly, but I was alive, unharmed, and completely upright in front of everyone. The silence that followed was different from before. It was not confusion this time. It was the sound of a room full of very old, very confident civilizations quietly realizing they had underestimated something for 6 full months without noticing. Vesek did not ask for another demonstration. He did not need to. Whatever he had hoped the footage would prove to the Compact Council, it was clearly not this. Instead, it showed something far more surprising. A species whose equipment treated its own destruction as a fair trade, every single time. Without hesitation, without needing to be redesigned, because that choice had been made long ago and never needed to be questioned again. The wearer mattered more than the tool. I watched several interpreters struggle to translate that idea properly, pausing and repeating words, trying to make sense of a concept that did not exist cleanly in their own languages. Threll never fully recovered from being remembered as the one who started a weapons test with a single fingertip. Months later, I heard that story still followed her through the halls of the ship, not exactly as a joke, but as a lesson people repeated when they wanted to warn others about making quick assumptions. People would say, half smiling, "Do not tap the human armor, it is always listening." As for me, my days changed after that. I went from pouring water at meetings to sitting at the table during them, not because I had done anything especially brave. I had simply stood still and allowed a well-built machine to do the job it was designed to do. In the weeks that followed, other members of the Compact grew curious about human engineering in a way they had never been before. They asked questions about our history, wanting to understand what kind of experiences shaped a species into building tools this way. I found myself explaining, more than once, that humans had lived through long periods of hardship, war, and disaster, and that lesson had shaped nearly everything we built afterward. We learned early that people are far harder to replace than equipment, so our tools were designed with that truth in mind from the very start. Some of the Compact engineers found this strange at first. Many of their societies had lived in peace for so long that the idea of designing something to break on purpose felt almost wasteful to them. Their machines were built to last for generations, polished and perfected over centuries, meant to be preserved rather than sacrificed. To them, destruction, even controlled destruction, seemed like failure. I tried to help them see it differently. I explained that our armor was not a failure at all, but a promise. One built into the very metal itself. It promised that no matter what happened, the person wearing it would walk away. That promise mattered more to us than any perfect, unbreakable design ever could. Over time, a few engineers from other worlds asked to study our designs more closely. They wanted to understand the specific way our dampeners worked, how the plates were built to release energy safely instead of holding on to it. I was not an expert myself, but I passed along their questions to specialists back on Earth. And slowly, a quiet exchange of ideas began to form between our two very different ways of thinking about safety. Vesic, to his credit, changed his attitude toward our team after that day. He remained formal, always careful with his words, but he no longer spoke to us the way someone speaks to a smaller, less capable group. During one late meeting, he even admitted, quietly and only to me, that he had expected an easy demonstration meant to embarrass us, not something that would humble his own expectations instead. He said it without much emotion, in his usual careful tone, but I understood it as an apology of sorts, even if he never used that exact word. Threll, for her part, eventually asked me directly about the accident, wanting to understand it better rather than simply avoid the topic. I explained everything patiently, the same way I had explained it that day on the observation deck. To my surprise, she listened closely, asking thoughtful questions about how the armor decided when to activate, and how engineers back home tested it safely before it was ever used in real situations. By the end of that conversation, her earlier embarrassment had softened into simple curiosity, and I think, in her own way, she respected the design more than she wanted to admit. Looking back on it now, I realized that Single Tap changed more than just my daily schedule aboard the ship. It changed the way an entire alliance of advanced civilizations looked at humanity. We were no longer seen only as a young, fragile species learning to walk among giants. We were seen as a group of people who had built machines willing to give everything of themselves, without hesitation, so their people never had to. That idea, simple as it sounds, ended up meaning more to the Compact than any weapon or piece of advanced technology ever could have shown them. It told them something about who we were, not just what we could build. And every time someone new joined the ship after that, sooner or later, someone would quietly warn them the same way people had warned each other for months. Do not tap the human armor. It is always listening, and it will always choose to protect the person wearing it, no matter the cost to itself.